Well, good morning, everyone. We're joining you today as part of the Investment Diversity Exchange Tide 10 series. My name is Ken McRay, and I am an LA-based managing director for Nuveen. I work with our public pension relationships, mainly in the Western US. Nuveen is a $1.1 trillion asset management firm managing traditional asset classes across equities and fixed income, as well as alternatives such as private credit, real estate, and ag, more specifically, farmland, agribusiness, and commodities. So I'm really excited today to be able to interview a fellow Angelino, Mr. Rod June, who is the CIO for the LA City Employee Retirement System. Lacers, as it's more affectionately known as, manages about $18 billion in pension assets for the purpose of providing a lifetime of retirement benefits to almost 50,000 active and retired members and beneficiaries. So with that, good morning, Rod.
Good morning, Ken.
Excellent. Good to see you this morning. It'll be great to eventually see you in person, but good to see you on screen this morning.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to when we can get out of our homes and from the remote situation and get back to the office and of course, get out and see all of our great investment managers.
Yeah, same here. So, of course, being a public pension program in a bit of a fishbowl as a public plan, all of your information is available online. So you're a bit of an open book. Folks can read about the program at their leisure. So I thought what we do today is keep it a bit light, a bit fun, learn more about you as the head of the investment group over at Lacers. So, with that kind of start, I'd love to know, where were you born? How'd you get your start in this business? How'd you, get to be the CIO of Lacers?
So I was born in California. I'm one of the maybe a few California natives, born a long time ago, of course. Actually, I was raised in Garden Grove, California, which is essentially more of a blue-collar neighborhood. My father was a carpet installer, and my mother was what they called a homemaker back then. I'm sure there's a different term for that now. From my high school, there were very few of us that went to college. I could probably count them on my hands. I was influenced to go to college because of friends that I sort of hung out with, and they were headed to college. And I thought, hey, I'm going to give this a try. My friends are going. I attended public schools in California, of course, through K through 12. And I went to Cal State Long Beach, which was the local college near my home. And then I went to Auburn University to get my graduate business degree. I'd like to say, I've worked at McDonald's. That was my first job while in high school. Surprisingly, it had a lot of influence on how I think about how I manage Lacers. And I could talk a little bit more about that later. But as many people who have studied McDonald's in case studies in college might have learned that they're very standard procedure oriented. And they've gotten hamburger production down to a science. So I think in terms of how I run my Lacers program, very procedural and try to be very consistent to the process. I worked for First Interstate Bank, my first job out of college, and then also became a management consultant. And then eventually made my way to the city of Los Angeles. I worked for the Los Angeles Housing Department, which is building affordable housing for low and moderate income families. And then moved on to Lacers after that and worked in all the different asset classes. Eventually became the CIO of Hawaii's Employees Retirement System. And then came back in 2012 to Los Angeles to be the CIO for this plan. I'm married. I've got 3 children, and you can see the picture, behind me. But that's sort of my life in a nutshell from, the time I was born until now.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So I can't wait to hear more about your views of McDonald's Corporation. I did an internship there when I was in business school, and it has long been my favorite American company for many different reasons. So I'd love to know how you've implemented some of those key learnings at Lacers. But before we get into that, one of the things I would love to know is, if not investments, what else might you be doing? What other career path might you be on? Would you be flipping burgers and fries?
Very well be. I almost didn't go to college because, many of the people in my high school were not college bound. If I hadn't gone to college, I'd probably be running some kind of business in some sort of management position. But as a professional, if I wasn't working in the investment field, I would probably be a management consultant, which is one of my previous jobs prior to coming to Lacers. And the way that was, I guess the approach this company that I worked for had was that you're basically a physician for small businesses, and you go in and you diagnose their problem, and then you look for the solution for the problems that they have. If I wasn't a management consultant, I'd probably be working in the nonprofit sector for a nonprofit organization because I really love giving back to the community and like to help people out. So, those could possibly be future jobs for me after I retire from Lacers. But, I'm very thankful that I am in the investment industry, and I really can't envision myself being anywhere else. It's been very good to me. I've moved up through the ranks at Lacers, and I guess I have a respectable position in the industry. And I'm hoping that my expertise is able to not only serve the members of Lacers, but also the investment community, because it is a partnership between what we do at Lacers and the investment world out there. And we certainly can't earn the money at Lacers on our own. We need partners who are experts in their various asset classes and fields and strategies to help us get to where we need to be financially for Lacers and to pay those benefits.
And as you mentioned, you may be doing something else and you're giving to the people, and rest assured, the role that you're in, I'm sure you recognize more than anyone else that it is giving back to those 50,000 active members and retirees as well. So, with that, there's obviously lots of people that admire you in that role. Who do you admire, whether it be in the business or elsewhere, and who do you look to for some type of advice?
There's not really any one specific person that I look to as sort of a role model. What I can say is when I attend investment conferences, it's oftentimes the keynote speakers or the panelists who will say something, provide some insight into their own personal philosophy or how they became successful. It's those more tidbits, words of advice that really sometimes leave a strong impression on me, and I'll write it down and I'll just kind of think about what they said. And it's really a collection or a book of different things that people have said over the years. But I can't say any one person out there has inspired me. It's really been a lot of people who I've met in my life, as well as people who I don't know all that well, but have said something that's really clicked well with me. And I take that to heart, and I think, wow, that worked for that person. Let me see if I can take that same advice and apply it to my own life and see if I can get some sort of success out of it or change my own behavior or modify the way I do things. So yeah, it's been more than just one person. It's many people in my life that have influenced my beliefs and values.
Gotcha. Understood. So tell me this, Rob, what does a typical day look like for you? I know every day is probably different, but just pick some day and give us what does a typical day look like?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure a lot of people wonder what do CIOs do, and sometimes I wonder what other CIOs are doing out there. But my typical day is sort of thinking about the future, looking out on the horizon, trying to plan 1 year ahead, 2 years ahead, even 3 years ahead. And I have all types of dashboards and calendars I use to do that. So I'm thinking about that when I come into work each day. What is the next best idea out there? What do I need to tell the board to help influence or shape the way they're thinking? More from an operational standpoint, I come in, I turn my computer on, I sit down, and I'm looking at a bunch of emails. I think we all do that, right? Trying to sort through the ones that are highest priority, sort of mid priority, and then lowest priority. And that kind of sets the day. I also look at my calendar to see which meetings I have. And I'm attending, usually 3 to 5 meetings a day. So I probably spend more than 70% of my day in meetings with money managers, with my boss, Sometimes we're in board meetings, right? We have those twice a month, and meeting with my staff and other stakeholders. So it's a lot of meetings throughout the day. I do my own work too. It's not like I delegate everything out to my staff. I have a collection of projects and assignments that I work on that are usually strategic or policy oriented, and those I tend to keep for myself. And sometimes I engage my own staff to work with me on these projects, but it depends on the sort of the complexity of the assignment. So I'm also trying to do that. It's a lot of juggling. I'm on, phone calls, etc. It's not really one specific thing. You're probably thinking, well, what about the investment work? That's what I have staff for. I've got very competent staff back at the office. And while I do more of the policy and strategic planning of what type of investments Lacer should be doing, I really leave the detailed work to them. They're experts in their own right, and they're the ones that make it all happen. They're doing the nuts and bolts, and I'm trying to look at the big house that's being built.
Yeah, so you've mentioned obviously the staff, and you've also mentioned the board that oversees staff and the money managers that you meet with. Maybe can you give us an overall sense of the organizational structure for Lacer?
Yeah, so I think we're set up like many public pension plans and even some private organizations. We have a board of directors. There are 7 of them. Of those 7, 4 of them are appointed by the mayor of Los Angeles, and 3 of them are elected by the membership. They, in turn, appoint a general manager, and the general manager appoint all of the senior managers, and including the CIO. So I report to my general manager back at Lacer's. And then I've got a staff as well. I've got 2, what I call sort of deputy CIOs. One is in charge of the public markets, one of the private markets, and each of them have their respective staff. And so that's the structure of Lacer's. Not totally innovative per se. It's very conventional, but it works well for us.
And also, as far as working well for you, how would you advise money managers to, if they want to build a relationship or a rapport with you and with your staff, what advice might you have for them, whether it be the do's or even the don'ts?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I get asked that by a number of people. But I would say, the best way to get to know us is probably go to our website first and do some homework, poke around, learn a little bit about what our plans, goals, and objectives are, a little bit about the board and the investment committee and what they're doing, because our minutes and agendas are there. And then after you've taken a look around and become familiar with Lacer's, then I would say reach out to either my staff or myself. We're probably best available through email right now, given the COVID situation. And, especially for emerging managers, I take all those meetings. I know it's a lot of work, but for me, I recognize that emerging managers can sometimes get lost in the shuffle and fall between the cracks amongst the hundreds or thousands of investment managers out there. So I like to develop the relationship directly with the emerging manager. So at some point, I will take a meeting with the emerging manager, or if it's just a traditional manager, either I'll take it or my staff will take it. And I think it's just very important to have a little bit of dialogue. As you can imagine, getting so many requests from managers, it's hard to schedule everyone in. And I would ask anyone who wants to build a relationship with Lacer's to look at this as sort of a journey, more long-term. And the relationship is not built on one meeting. I think it's a situation where it takes several meetings or exchanges of emails and encounters before that relationship is really established. And then once we have a manager search and we start looking for people to populate our manager stable, it becomes easier to understand that manager's strategy if the relationship's there. And I'm not just talking about the numbers and the performance, things that I know that managers like to talk about. We recognize in this business that it's a people business, and it's very important to establish the personal side of the relationship. And I'm not talking about necessarily going out for drinks every night, things like that. But I think getting to know one another on a personal level, sort of what the person's values and their own sort of personal goals and objectives are, and getting to know people on a personal level first, I think is more important than jumping right into the business. Because at the end of the day, because this is a people business, I'm more interested in the people than the firm when it comes right down to who we're going to hire. And once I understand a person's beliefs and philosophy and what they find important in their lives and what they don't find important, then I think I'm better equipped and capable of evaluating whether that manager represented by that person or the team of people is really a best fit for Lacers.
Could you imagine, given the restrictions on travel, restrictions on being in the office or having people in the office, could you imagine or envision at some point an all virtual due diligence process where you get to know someone virtually from start to culmination of a relationship?
I never envisioned that we would be using virtual platforms to get to know people, even in conducting due diligence and hiring. We've just hired a number of investment managers this year where there was no person-to-person, handshake type of meeting. It was all done virtually. That's not my preference. I think that there's a lot to be said about meeting someone in person. I think what people share with one another is different in person versus through virtual means. That's not to say that there isn't value in a virtual encounter. I think that I can get to know someone quite well through a number of virtual meetings. But there's something about, meeting people, shaking their hand, getting them more relaxed, I think, in sort of a face-to-face meeting or perhaps going out for a coffee. I think people maybe let their guard down a little bit more. And I say that in a good way. Again, for me, getting to know the person is extremely important. And if everyone's got their guard up, I'm not really getting to see the true person behind the face. So while I think that virtual means has been good in this sort of COVID environment that we're in and social distancing, I do look forward to that point in time when we can travel again and we can have face-to-face meetings. And maybe we use virtual means as a supplement. I think it's a great tool to getting to know people, but I don't think it's a pure substitute for the face-to-face personal encounter.
Speaking on that personal aspect, given that I agree, it is still a people business and that's important. It's clearly why I'm on the relationship side of our endeavors. I heard a coach say, an NFL coach say that when they first got into that leadership role, or their whole life, they wanted to focus on the X's and O's of football. And then they got into the leadership role and found themselves mainly, if not only, focused on the personnel matters of the people that report to them. So with it being a people business and you have people that report to you, how do you go about recruiting, cultivating, developing talent? How do you go about kind of building your team and encouraging teamwork?
That part of the job takes up probably more of my time than the investment side, dealing with the administration and personnel matters. In terms of recruiting, Lacers is a city department of Los Angeles, and the city of Los Angeles has a civil service structure in place. So recruitment is very regimented. You take examinations, you get scored. It's very structured, and there's some good aspects of it in that it makes the process very consistent and I think fair as people come through the process to get jobs with the city of LA, including Lacers. But I also think it can be somewhat stifling, and it doesn't allow for, I think, more of a open dialogue with potential candidates, because we are not allowed to ask just any question we'd like. We have to stay within a very prescribed set of questions. And sometimes you can only extract limited amounts of information about a candidate through these structured questions, and we're not really allowed to deviate from that. So there's the good side because of the consistency and process, which I do believe is extremely valuable in recruitment. But I also think that asking questions of candidates that are tailored for that specific candidate based on their resume or things that they may share during the interview is maybe even more important. So it's been tough working in government to recruit the best people, but I've been able to work around that by, I think, by the way I interview, because not everyone wants to work for government, right? There is lower salary, obviously. The potential to move up and to become sort of a great person in the business industry is just not there when you're working for government. But we do offer a good quality of life and a good balance between work and personal time. And there's a lot of benefits of working for government, including, taking time off when you need to. We don't travel as much, I think, as someone in your position. We tend to have more money managers coming to us when we need them than us having to go out. In terms of diversity and inclusion, that's tough. It's not been an easy road. I think part of it is there are still certain cultural stigmas or values out there that people carry with them. A lot of, I guess, I don't know if you want to call it professional baggage that has, I think, sort of hindered our ability to become more inclusive and diverse. Now, fortunately, here in Los Angeles is an extremely diverse city, and our candidate pool that comes through the city has been very diverse. And if you look at my own team, we are probably one of the more diverse investment teams in public pension plans. And I'm very proud of that we do have that diversity of thought, and I think we're very inclusive. But for the investment industry as a whole, I think that it's still a tough road ahead of us. And I don't think that we're quite where we should be. I think that there's been a lot of great leaders, including established investment managers, and those who recognize that the investment industry is just not diverse. We see that. You go to conferences and you see the different managers that come through your door that meet with you. They're predominantly white Caucasian males. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think studies have proven that diversity of thought can add so much value to the conversation. And I think as we move towards a greater number of diverse populations coming through the door in the investment industry, the better decisions that will be made. And I think that when you're talking about millions and billions of dollars, you've got to get the answers as right as possible. And I think having those conversations with diverse people in the room lead to better conversation, a more intelligent and intellectual conversation about what is the right course of action. And so I embrace diversity of thought. I think it's just important, even if you don't agree with people, because I think that's one of the dangers of diversity, is you're going to hear people say things that you're not comfortable or used to hearing, but you have to hear the broader story, because we all know that working in investments or any type of organization where you're making very high-level decisions, you need to have different points of view. You need to see all the facts and figures, not just a slice of it. And there's too much groupthink out there. And so bringing in people, more women and more people from underrepresented populations helps to increase that conversation, the intellectual conversation that one needs to make the best decisions on behalf of a public pension plan, for example. So we have a long ways to go. I'm proud to say that I'm part of this movement. I've tried to engage a number of emerging managers to understand our process, to get to know us better. And my goal is to ultimately help give capital to these people, because I think they're going to offer something that many traditional managers don't necessarily have, and that's a movement away from the group think. And so, those are my sort of comments on diversity inclusion. I don't think we're where we should be. We have a long ways to go, but we all have to work together to bring more equality to our society and into the investment industry.
And I appreciate those comments. I appreciate your commitment to diversity and inclusion. It's very important to me. It's why, or one of the reasons I joined Nuveen. Nuveen is owned by TIAA, which was the first Fortune 500 company to have an African-American CEO. and even today has an African-American CEO in Roger Ferguson. The Nuveen, our Nuveen investment unit has Jose Minaya as a man of Hispanic descent, and about 25% of our portfolio managers are women. So those are statistics we're very proud of, but there's obviously a long way to go for us as well as the industry. So I'm glad to see this being as much of a topic today and the work that Tide does in this arena. And I look forward to kind of seeing what the future holds. So on that note, with respect to the future, when you look a year out, what do you expect life to look like a year from now, especially given that you've got your dashboard, but whether you can tackle this from the markets, from the work arrangements to the mood of the country? What do you expect a year from now?
I think we're at an inflection point, and maybe it was forced upon us by COVID, but I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty over the next year or two in so many different ways. I'm not talking about just within the investment industry and the economic landscape, but look at socially here in the United States. I think we're at that inflection in that pivot point where there's going to be a new direction. Where that direction is, I don't know, and my crystal ball is a little fuzzy on that, but we are certainly in for some big changes coming forward. I think that the markets are just going to continue to, demonstrate volatility. I think with the political changes, what's happened with COVID and how that's impacted the economic landscape globally, not just in the US, but globally, the recovery is going to be more prolonged. And I think that when I say the recovery, I'm not talking about the stock market, because the stock market behaves sometimes with a mind of its own, and it doesn't always mesh well with what I'm hearing from economic experts. But eventually, over time, I think that there is some sort of alignment between the two. But I just see that the recovery is going to take some time. I think the mood is going to be cautious. The word of caution or be cautious is going to be very important. I think a plan like Lacers is not going to take any sudden moves or do any kind of knee-jerk reaction. I think we're going to tread very carefully about what we decide we're going to do from an investment standpoint, both strategically, and I'll use the word tactically. We're not recognized at Lacers as being a tactical investor, but we do recognize, especially in these very volatile times, that there are opportunity sets out there that come and go based on how the market's moving back and forth, as the tide moves in and out. And I want to position Lacers to be able to capitalize on those types of opportunities as they come forward. Because as we know, some of these opportunities only last, a year or so. And for a public pension plan, our policies don't allow us to necessarily move that quickly. Sometimes it's only once every 3 years we have an asset liability study and we reset sort of our strategy. But there may be some sort of interim opportunity like what we just saw this year with TALF, where you have to get in within a month or two or you lose out on that opportunity. I think in terms of the health of the world, I think we're all going to be much more aware of health matters. COVID obviously has been a major influence as to how we live our lives now. We've made so many modifications from social distancing, wearing masks, not touching certain things, or not shaking hands. This is going to, I think, resonate going forward. I don't think this is going to end right at COVID. I think people are going to continue to wear their masks and be very conscious of who they're interacting with and being more aware of health considerations as they interact and venture out into the world. I think remote working is going to be a huge part going forward. Despite what I said, I'm looking forward to going out and traveling again. I think we've seen the cost efficiencies of doing many things remotely where we don't have to jump on a plane and book a hotel and pay for ground transportation, meals, etc. And this can only be, to a certain extent, good for the plan as we minimize our costs. But you only want to minimize costs so much before you become penny wise, pound foolish. And I think there has to be that balance between what's really important out there, which, as we know, investments, this is a people industry, getting to know people isn't a free proposition. It costs money. From our plan, we have to take our dollars from the plan and expend them judiciously and prudently to ensure that we're getting more value by spending that dollar, incremental value by going out and meeting people and shaking someone's hand versus just sitting behind a laptop and looking at someone on a screen. There's got to be that balance, and I don't know exactly where it will end up, but I envision that working virtually, working remotely is going to be a much bigger part of going forward in the workplace. Even in my own office, I don't envision more than 50% of my staff ever being in the office going forward for the long term. And that's quite a departure from the days when we're all, every day, everyone comes to work, right? We see each other, but I think that we have found that the virtual means can be effective for certain types of interactions with staff and money managers.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I look forward to seeing how things develop. And as we go on that path, how about we close with a couple more personal items in the near term in terms of how we get there, or what today looks like. When you look at, let's say, things that keep you calm today, things that are your go-to refuge, whether it's a book or whether it's a show that you're watching, what's your go-to today?
My go-to today is watching a lot of YouTubes, both educational as well as just recreational or things that are of interest to me. I go out for walks.
You're not on TikTok?
Nope, but my kids are, or they were. No, but I do a lot of visual things. I like to watch cable TV. I like to watch the news, of course. That's extremely important. I'm sitting in front of the computer at night, going through the LATimes.com, WashingtonJournal.com, spending a lot of time trying to gather news, and learning what's going on in the world. And that actually is, in some respects, a calming effect for me, because uncertainty for someone in my position can create a lot of anxiety. And the more that I can understand what's going on in the world, especially things with COVID and political events, it actually allows me to develop a course of action or a plan. And to the extent that I can sort of manage uncertainty, knowing what the facts and figures are, I think that's calming to me. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I like to be well informed. So besides, watching YouTubes and things like that, I spend a lot of time just being aware, watching the news.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to wrap with the most important question I've asked you throughout this whole interview, if you will, and that is Lakers, Clippers, or other?
Other. My go-to team is Auburn University. That's the school I went to for graduate work, and I follow the sports programs there quite closely and intently. And I'm, despite the COVID, they still have a football season, and they're playing a limited number of games, and that's my go-to team. That's who I really follow.
Gotcha. Well, you guys have had some good years, I must say. Rod, this has been awesome. Thank you for taking the time to speak to the Tide faithful. Any final comments that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah. For anyone out there who's thinking about going into this industry and eventually perhaps aspiring to become a chief investment officer, I do have a few words of advice, and I'll keep them rather short. One is network. I think we all do that pretty well, but networking is extremely important in getting to know as many people who are influential, key decision makers, but not necessarily just those people. I mean, you can learn a lot from just anyone who you talk to. And I love going to conferences and meeting people from all backgrounds and walks of life, because I learned something from those encounters. I'd also say get into the habit of taking initiative. In my role as a CIO, it's not just doing things that the board tells you to do. You as a CIO have to go out there and come up with the next best idea, and then figure out how to sell it, and then how to get the buy-in and then implement it. So you've got to be comfortable with risk. And I think most of us in this industry recognize that risk is part of what we do every day. Just to go back to a point earlier about the journey, I think sometimes it's not the end point that you should strive for, but it's the journey and the experiences you learn as you journey towards that end point that can probably be more valuable than the end point itself. And sometimes those little signposts along your journey divert you, cause disruption, and you end up going in a different direction that might be even better than what you thought. And then lastly, I would say, don't be afraid of failure. You have to take that risk of putting your neck out on the line, knowing that you are going to fail. But as many people will say, it's not the fact that you fail, but how you recover from that failure and what did you learn from it. And so for those who aspire to be a CIO, those are the tips I would offer. It's a great position to be in. I'm very fortunate and blessed to be running a $18, $19 billion plan, depending on the day. But it's been very rewarding, and I wouldn't trade this job for anything in the world.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Rod. This is awesome. We appreciate you and value you. We're fortunate to have you as a supporter of Tide, as a manager of the city of LA's assets, and a member of this industry. So thank you, and thank you for taking some time today to talk to us. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you sooner rather than later in person.
Thank you very much. It has been a wonderful discussion today.